Hello, my name is Mykola Buchyn, and I want to introduce you our survey on topic problems and prospects of the neutralization of threats of voting in Ukraine. First of all, I want to talk about relevance of our article. It's continue first of all with the development of information and communication technologies, also with penetration of information and communication technologies into politics, also with the desire of Ukrainian authorities to introduce electronic voting. Relevance also connect with the coronavirus pandemic and actualization of remote form of communication. Also, we can talk about the Russians war against Ukraine. Also, we can talk about the need to study the perspectives of neutralization of threats of voting in Ukraine. Also, we can talk about the need for practical verification of the author's methodology for calculating the level of potential neutralization of electronic voting threats in Ukraine, and so on. I want to say that our research is the second research and based on the expert survey, second expert survey, and on the slide we can see that our expert respondents number of respondents was 100 and all experts was divided into 5 categories: scientists, analyst experts, politics, members of public organization, and information technology specialists. And on the slide we can see the criteria and methods of selection this expert. Also we can see purpose of engagement, this category of experts, number and of this expert, and so on. The next slide shows the level of expert assessment of negative impact of implementation of voting threats. On the slide, we can see, for example, that falsification of electronic voting, one of the threats of voting, has the most negative impact on the electronic voting, and on the slide we can see the impact in general in the world, for example, and impact in Ukraine. And for example, in Ukraine are some difference between the Ukraine and general case. For example, pressure on votes is threat number 3 in general, but only the threat number 6 in Ukraine. And for example, threats, hacker attacks on the electronic voting system in general has number 4, but in Ukraine, according to the Russia-Ukrainian war, these threats have number 3. On the next slide, we can see the expert assessment of the possibilities of neutralizing the threats of electronic voting in Ukraine. Also, these 15 threats of voting in Ukraine, and for example, the threat number 1, falsification of electronic voting, has results 26, 46, and 28. 26 is the result of possibility of complete neutralization PI, and it means that 26 experts said that falsification of electronic voting can be neutralized completely. 46 result possibility of partial neutralization PPI means that 46 experts said that falsification of electronic voting can be neutralized partial, and 28 experts said that falsification of electronic voting cannot be neutralized at all. On the next slide, we can see the expert assessment of the possibilities of neutralization, the threats of electronic voting in Ukraine, but on diagram. On the next slide, we can show you the formula of calculation, the level of potential neutralization of electronic voting threats in Ukraine. And the general formula is L E sum of L and I. And where L is the level of potential neutralization of threats to electronic voting in Ukraine, L and I is the level of impact of neutralizing a specific threat on the security of electronic voting. The next second formula we can see on this slide where Li is the level of potential neutralization of a specific threat to electronic voting in Ukraine. Ki is the coefficient of a specific threat to electronic voting in Ukraine. Ki is a coefficient, for example, the threats number 1 has the most negative impact on electronic voting, and coefficient for this threat is maximal 15. And for example, the threats number 15 has less negative impact on electronic voting, and coefficient for this threats is 1. Lmax is the level of influence that corresponds to 100% neutralization of the threats. And the next formula, Le, where the Pi is the level of possibility of complete neutralization of a specific threat to electronic voting, PPI is the level of possibility of partial neutralization of the threats to electronic voting, and Li is the range from 0, in this case all experts believe that these threats to electronic voting in Ukraine cannot be neutralized, to 100, all experts believe that these threats to electronic voting in Ukraine can be completely neutralized. And N is a number of experts. In our case, it's 100 experts. On the next slide, we can see the arrangement and the level of the threats voting neutralization assessment scale. And when result is from 0 to 48, it's a low level of threat voting neutralizations. And in this case, the main threats to voting have not been largely neutralized. This makes voting impossible to use without harming democracy. Therefore, the presence of this level will mean the need to reject the implementation of voting in Ukraine. When the result is from 50 to 64, it means the average level, and in this case, existing threats to electronic voting in Ukraine are partially neutralized. This level is not a reason to reject the introduction of voting. However, in this case, appropriate control, security, and verification of a voting result should be ensured. Only after that, a decision should be made on the further usage of refusal to use electronic voting in Ukraine. and when the result is from 75 to 100, in this case it's higher level, and in this case most of the threats to electronic voting can be neutralized, allowing for the implementation of electronic voting in Ukraine without any concerns. And on the last slide, we can see the final results of our expert survey, the possibilities and prospects of threats neutralization of electronic voting in Ukraine. As we can see, from 15 threats of voting in Ukraine, 4 threats show the low level of threats neutralization. It's a falsification of electronic voting, hacker attacks on the electronic voting system, pressure on voters, and inability to control compliance with the law during a voting. The last 11 threats of a vote in Ukraine show the average level, and the general level of potential neutralization of a voting threat in Ukraine is also average. It shows that we can introduce and use the electronic voting in Ukraine, but only after control, after neutralization of the most threats and so on. Thank you for your attention.